You sit down to read a book. You chose this. Nobody made you. And within minutes, you need to schedule the dentist. The report isn't done. Something someone said last Tuesday. A thought that has nothing to do with anything. If you wanted to be there, why does the mind go somewhere else? Here's what makes it stranger. The mind doesn't drift most during pointless tasks or boring meetings. Psychologist Jonathan Smallwood showed in 2009 that mind-wandering peaks during tasks requiring working memory and semantic processing. Meaningful conversations, reading, anything involving language and meaning. Not mechanical work, the demanding moments. The reason is structural. The default mode network and the executive attention system compete for the same neural resources. When the task itself is the kind of thing the default mode network also does, narrative, interpretation, meaning, the competition is at its highest. Everything that has been waiting, the dentist, the unfinished report, the conversation from last week, seems to arrive the moment you decide to give your attention to something, just to read a book. That's not a coincidence. That's the architecture. Nobody stole your attention. Your brain handed it away. If that sounds familiar, you've probably already tried to fix it. There's a graveyard of apps on most people's phones. Headspace, Calm, whatever came before them. You did 3 days, maybe a week. It felt useful in the session and then dissolved the second your inbox opened. Here's what most of those apps get wrong. They frame presence as a destination, like you're supposed to arrive somewhere quiet and stay there. And when thoughts come back, because they always come back, it feels like failure. It isn't failure. It's just the wrong target. Being present is not having an empty mind. It is catching the drift. The goal was never silence. The goal is noticing when you've left. And the cost of not noticing is larger than most people think. A study tracked over 2,000 people in real time, asking what they were doing and whether their mind was on it. Nearly 47% of the time, the mind was somewhere else. Most people hear that and think, unhappiness. But there's a quieter cost. Moments lived in dispersal aren't just felt less. They're encoded thin. They come back vague, fragmentary, not quite yours. 47% of mind wandering is not 47% unhappy. It's 47% forgotten. The brain doesn't wander by accident. In 2001, neurologist Marcus Rachel identified a network that becomes more active when you're doing nothing in particular, not less. He called it the default mode network. It was immediately misread as the brain idling. It isn't. The default mode network runs simulations of the past, rehearses futures, replays conversations, builds social narratives, worries about things that haven't happened yet. It does not live in the present. It lives in the loop. Neuroscientists R. Nathan Spreng and Cheryl Grady showed in 2010 that the default mode network constructs 3 things simultaneously: who you were, who you are, and who you will be. Autobiographical memory, self-concept, future simulation, all at once, all requiring the mind to leave the present to do it. The brain builds you by wandering away from now. We didn't lose presence. We grew the capacity to leave it. Now, here's where it gets specific, because there are 2 distinct ways the brain processes self-reference, and they don't overlap. Norman Farb and his colleagues showed this at the University of Toronto in 2007. Using brain imaging, they identified 2 experimentally separable modes. The first, a narrative self, default mode network dominant, generating you as a story, past plus future, language, interpretation, the voice in your head that explains what is happening to you, the one who replays the argument from 3 weeks ago while you're supposedly listening to someone right now. The second, an experiential self, insula dominant, processing immediate sensation, body state, present input. No story, just this. You have two selves. One tells stories about your life, the other one lives it. Decades before that imaging study, a philosopher named González Pecoche described what the ordinary mind does. He wrote that it tends in general toward what is known, the external surroundings. That is an almost exact description of what the default mode network does when left unsupervised. He also gave us the clearest image of it in motion. These thoughts enter the individual's mind like passengers getting onto a bus. Having settled themselves in it, they speak, they persuade, they convince, and when they no longer have anything to say, they get off the mental vehicle, often leaving behind a residue. Your thoughts are passengers. You should be the driver, but most people don't even realize that it's the passengers who are driving. The thoughts that arrive during mind wandering didn't come from a decision. You didn't choose to replay that conversation. You didn't decide to run that simulation about next Friday. The passengers boarded while the driver looked away. There's a name for what that looks like from the inside. Not sleep, something quieter. A kind of vacancy where the mind is technically present but not registering. Eyes open, ears receiving, and yet nothing actually landing. Looking without seeing. Listening without processing. It arrives so gradually and without announcement that by the time you notice you were gone, you've already been away for a while. In the book The Mechanism of Conscious Life, González Pecoche drew a line between two kinds of people. Those who are the masters of their thoughts and govern their lives by the dictates of their own inspirations, and those who are but vulgar followers of the thoughts that drag the individual about like a robot. Not a moral judgment, a structural one. The question is who's steering. William James perceived something that goes along the same line of thinking in 1890. In The Principles of Psychology, he wrote, "The faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will." And then he added something that should have changed everything. An education which should improve this faculty would be the education par excellence. But it is easier to define this ideal than to give practical directions for bringing it about. 130 years later, we have the neuroscience. We have the directions. What we never acquired was the insistence that this is worth teaching. González Pecoche had that insistence. He argued that conscious evolution can only take place through a strict examination of the individual's thoughts and actions, aiming at selecting the most favorable ones. Not absence of thoughts, a relationship with them. Not silence, examination. The Stoics thought along the same lines. They built an entire practice around it. They called it prosoche, which translates roughly as self-attention. But it was never passive. Marcus Aurelius wrote the Meditations while running a war, not on retreat, not in silence. In the middle of empire and chaos, he returned to himself, paragraph by paragraph. Epictetus, who began his life as a slave, put it plainly, where you place your attention is the fundamental moral act. Not your beliefs, not your intentions, your attention. His first principle in the Enchiridion: some things are in our control and others are not. What's in our control always and only is where the mind points. So why doesn't trying harder work? In 1994, psychologist Daniel Wegner published a landmark paper on ironic process theory. The finding, trying to suppress a thought increases its frequency. The monitoring system that checks, am I thinking about X, must access X to verify its absence, and in doing so, activates exactly what it's trying to suppress. And then there's something the philosopher Krishnamurti observed that cuts even deeper. He noticed that the moment you catch yourself being distracted, that exact moment, you are already no longer fully in the drift. The noticing is the return. There is no separate observer standing outside the mind, watching and judging. The mind that catches the drift is already partially back. The catching is the whole move. This removes the shame spiral. You don't need to get angry at yourself for leaving. You don't need to achieve some calm state before you begin. You need to notice. And noticing, when done without self-judgment, is presence already starting. A practiced mind is not a mind that doesn't wander. It's a mind that returns faster. The Killingsworth data contains a nuance most people skip. In a 2022 follow-up published in PNAS, the research showed that mind wandering is not monolithic. What's actually costly is the unintentional, unnoticed kind. The mind that drifts for 90 seconds without knowing it during the conversation that matters most. That's the gap. Britta Hölzel and her colleagues at Harvard showed in 2011 that what mindfulness training actually develops is the drift and return cycle, not stillness. Every return is a repetition. The circuit strengthens. The gap shrinks. The drift is not the failure. The drift is the condition you're training in. The return, deliberate without shame, is the rep. This reframes the whole practice. The question that changes everything is not, how do I stop drifting? It's, how fast can I come back? 3 tools, each under 10 seconds, each grounded in something already named. The first, sensory grounding. It comes from the neuroscience of interception. A.D. Craig showed in 2009 that the anterior insula is what the brain uses to construct the sense of being a physical body in the present moment. Without it, the present is abstract. With it, it's immediate. And because the insula is also what interrupts the default mode network, any sufficiently distinct sensory input trips it, the same move that grounds you also pulls you back. Feel the pressure of your feet on the floor. Notice the temperature of the air on your skin. Not as a spiritual exercise, as a mechanism. You are injecting real sensory data into a prediction system that has been running on free simulation. Carl Friston's work on predictive processing makes this precise. The brain doesn't experience the present. It predicts it and updates based on what arrives. Grounding gives it something real to update on. 5 seconds. That's the whole move. The second, the doorway reset. It uses architecture you already have. Gabriel Radvansky's research on event boundaries shows that crossing a physical threshold triggers a natural reset of working memory. The brain clears whatever narrative was running. It's involuntary. Use it deliberately. Every time you walk through a door, finish a call, step outside, take one breath and ask yourself 2 things. Where am I and why am I here? 1 breath, 2 questions. You're converting the brain's existing segmentation mechanism into a conscious return. No additional time required. Just the doorways you were already walking through. The third, count the catches. Instead of targeting the drift for suppression, which activates it, you track each return as a positive event. Count the catches, not the drifts, the catches. This is precisely what James meant, bringing back a wandering attention over and over again. Each catch is one of those reps. It's what González-Pecoche called the strict examination of thought, not as a verdict on yourself, but as a practice repeated in the middle of ordinary life. Thich Nhat Hanh wrote in The Miracle of Mindfulness that presence doesn't happen in a dedicated session. It happens while washing the dishes. That's where the catches are. Count them there. When a catch becomes a win instead of evidence of failure, the practice becomes self-reinforcing. You start wanting to notice, and the more you want to notice, the shorter the gap gets. The conversations that matter most are exactly where the return is most worth making. Not because you'll become someone who stays present, but because the life you actually remember is the one you were actually there for. In Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman drew a line between two selves. The experiencing self, which lives each moment as it happens, and the remembering self, which stores the story of your life. When attention drifts, the experiencing self isn't there. The remembering self has almost nothing to encode. Thin, fragmentary. Decades before that research, González-Pecoche named the same thing. He wrote, "When thought fluctuates, there is no consciousness, and therefore what is experienced with it is not recorded in life. It is a shred of life that slips away." Not lost time. A shred of life itself. The life you come back to, that's the one you get to keep. How many times did your mind wander during this video? No judgment, just notice. And what's the moment in your day when you disappear most? A class, a meeting, a conversation you should have been fully in. Leave it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious, and it might shape what we cover next. Thank you for staying until the end. Your time is valuable, and I genuinely hope this was worth it. If this video left you with something, a thought, a shift, a question you didn't have before, a like helps it reach someone else who might need it too. That's all I ask. And if you want to keep going, subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next one.